Give me a 5-minute summary of the core beliefs. I don't want to put you on the spot. It's not a question.
No, that's not hard at all.
So lay it out. That would be very helpful.
So we have a famous hadith in which we're told that the angel Gabriel came in the form of a man and asked the prophet, "Tell me about faith." And the Prophet Muhammad said, faith is to believe that there's only one God, and that Muhammad, which includes all the previous messengers, is a messenger of God, to believe in angels, to believe in the books that God has revealed, to believe in the last day, the day of judgment, and to believe in the measuring out of good and evil, that good and evil is part of life. And then he said, tell me about Islam. And he said, Islam is that you make the testimony of faith, that you pray 5 times a day, that you fast Ramadan, that you pay zakat, the 2.5% of your standing wealth at the end, not your income tax, but your standing wealth at the end of a year, that's a whole year, 1/40th is given to poor people. There's 8 categories that are given in the Quran. And that you, if you're able to, you make a pilgrimage once in your lifetime to Mecca. And then he said, tell me about ihsan, which is the 3rd dimension of Islam. And he said, and this is the dimension of virtuous being, like being a person of arity, of excellence in the world. And he said, ihsan is to worship God as if you see God. And if you don't see him, at least you know that he sees you. So you have an awareness of that there is a divine presence. And you should be in a state of awareness in your behavior. One of the beauties of the religion to me is that you'll find whatever you're looking for in it. I mean, Islam, it has a very simple theology that anybody can understand. In Surah Al-Ikhlas, the chapter that says, say God is unique, God is completely independent, God neither gives birth nor was God born, and there's nothing like God. So it gives you a very simple theology that anybody can understand. And yet, embedded in that simplicity is an extraordinary complexity that actually created a metaphysical tradition that Western scholars have spent their lifetime studying.
Why you found the Islamic tradition preferable, let's say, to the Orthodox tradition, that you did enjoy the rituals that were part of that, at least. So let's deal with practical issues first. So,
the tradition itself, what struck me was, one, I got to keep all of the prophets that I believed in already, and I added, in addition, what we consider to be the final prophet. And just as very often Christians marvel at how Jews miss Jesus, Muslims also marvel at how Christians and Jews miss Muhammad. Although, to be fair to the Jews, they do acknowledge the prophet as a providential force, and they do acknowledge him as a Noahidic messenger preparing the way for the coming of the Messiah. So they do recognize that he was a providential force. At least the great, if you read George Kohler's book on Jewish theology, he has a chapter on Judaism and Islam. And certainly the great father of Orientalism, Ignaz Goldziher, he actually said that he felt that Islam was the only religion that somebody of a philosophical bent could actually accept. And he wanted to really bring in the gift of philosophy into Judaism that had been, that the Muslims had so richly participated in. In fact, there's an argument that just as Judaism prepared the way for Christianity, it was Islam that prepared the way for a philosophical Western Christendom. Because if you look at the transmission of all of that knowledge that comes into Europe, it's quite extraordinary. I mean, St. Thomas Aquinas, who's 13th century, he dies in 1274, and yet he's the doctor of the church. Just look at the number of times he quotes Muslims.
I've been trying to understand the Christian doctrine of the word and its relationship to the Jewish prophetic tradition for a long time, and I know that Christ is a central figure in Islam as well.
For Muslims, Christ is a central figure, and Muslims do believe in a second coming of Christ, born of the virgin birth, but Christ is not divine, Christ is human. But this idea, Catholics never call, like evangelicals, they don't call on Christ as, when they pray, they call on God, the Father, through an intercession of Christ, which is, I think, very different from worshiping Christ as the Godhead. Because I think it becomes very confusing even for a lot of Christians.
I think it is confusing, and the fact that it is one of the stumbling blocks to something approximating a union of the great Abrahamic traditions is quite a problem. And
well, we can agree on a lot of things. I mean, we certainly
yes.
we agree that there is a God, that he created us. We agree that the prophets were sent to warn people and to give them good news. And we agree that there's a day of judgment and people are going to be resurrected. I mean, those are some pretty strong things to base a sense of shared concern on. We certainly agree on family. We agree on the importance of raising children healthy. We all share the liberal arts tradition. Muslims, Christians, and Jews all share the tradition of the liberal arts.
Right.
All three of our religions share virtue ethics, all three. And we all really acknowledge and really have benefited greatly from the Nicomachean ethics. All three traditions recognize the Nicomachean ethics and its importance. And that's why our ethical tradition, our great treatises, reflect many of the truths that Aristotle articulated in the Nicomachean ethics.
I'm trying to figure out how to be a Jew and a Christian and a Muslim at the same time.
But become Muslim, that's the best way, because the beauty of Islam is you get the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the Last Testament. I mean, that really is, for me, even the Jews acknowledge this, because Islam in many ways is a universalized Judaism. It's Judaism for the Gentiles. One of the most interesting things about Islam is it is a truly universal religion in that you can go from Indonesia to California and find all of these different expressions of the same central truths of Islam with their own local colorings. So the West African Muslims are not like the Middle Eastern Muslims. The Middle Eastern Muslims are not like the Indian Muslims. Anybody can find what they're looking for. And that is the power of the faith, I think, is that it is truly a universal faith. And I think one of the things that Western people tend to do, one, they don't recognize that it's a Western faith, because it is. It's part of the Abrahamic faith. It was in Spain for centuries. It's been in Eastern Europe for centuries. And even Istanbul, which is the great capital of Islam for centuries, is half in Europe and half in the East. And that's why it really bridges these two worlds.
I think it makes sense for religious people, Christians, Jews, and Islamic alike, to focus on their commonalities in the face of the things that are disintegrating our cultures. We could start by trying to make some peace between us if we're going to consort ourselves reasonably as religious individuals. Right.
And I commend you for trying to do some bridge building, because, arguably, there's been so much negativity around this faith and around its adherents that there's an almost instantaneous association with the most negative aspects of humanity with the religion. And it's quite tragic.